Week 16 in the NFL, that can only mean one thing. The fantasy football semifinals are here. And who better to help you get one step closer to fantasy football glory than Sports Illustrated senior fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano, who has his stardom and sit-em list ready. He checked it twice. Let's find out who's naughty or nice, starting with the quarterbacks. Fabs, who you got?
Santa Fabs to you, pal. I mean, come on, look at this thing. It's a little big, but glorious nonetheless. How about them Cowboys? Ugh, last week was bad. Let's go with Justin Fields, though, as a stardom quarterback. You know, Bill, his numbers haven't been great lately. Fewer than 11 points in 2 of his last 3 games, but he's got that Cardinals this week. So this is a very good spot. Their defense has given up an average of nearly 20 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. Start Justin Fields. And I also like Trevor Lawrence. But keep in mind, he got put in the NFL's concussion protocol. So if he doesn't clear it, it's going to be C.J. Beathard, and all bets are off. But if Lawrence is a go this week against the Buccaneers, this is a great matchup. They've allowed 17-plus points to quarterbacks 7 times this year, including 5 who've gone over 20. The Buccaneers' defense is vulnerable to quarterbacks, so if Lawrence is a go, he's a stardom.
All right, let's pivot to the quarterbacks that you don't like this week, Russell Wilson and Jordan Love.
Russell Wilson could leave coal in your stockings against the New England Patriots, who just held Patrick Mahomes to a QB 15 finish last week. Only 3 quarterbacks have beaten the Patriots for more than 17.7 points. Russell Wilson likely will not be the 4th. So sit Russell Wilson. And you mentioned Jordan Love, who was pretty good last week, 17-plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. But the Panthers, their defense is very good. 6 touchdown passes allowed on their home field all season long. So Love could be a Scrooge in fantasy land.
Let's move over to running backs. 2 guys you like, Breece Hall and Chuba Hubbard.
Breece Hall was bad last week, too. This is all about the matchup, too. The Commanders' defense over the last 4 weeks, they have given up the 7th most fantasy points to running backs, the 2nd most rushing yards. Breece Hall will bounce back in New Jersey, get him into your lineup. And then Chuba Hubbard, I mean, the volume's been there, Bill. I mean, the guy is getting massive workloads every single week. Forget about Miles Sanders. The matchup's right this week against Green Bay. They've given up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs in the last 4 weeks. They've also allowed runners to rush for right around 5 yards per carry. So start Chuba Hubbard as a flex.
All right, moving over to the running backs that you don't like. These guys are on the sit list. Saquon Barkley from the Giants and Javonte Williams, who's up against the Patriots.
You can call these guys start them and pray, I guess. Maybe then just hard sits. Saquon, I mean, listen. 3 of his last 5 games, he's been in single digits. Now, the other 2 games, he was really good. But he's got the Eagles this week, and you may be saying, wait a minute, Santa Fabs, Ken Walker just smoked the Eagles. That was in Seattle. In Philadelphia, they've allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs. This is a very tough matchup for Saquon, so start him and temper your expectations and fade him in DFS. And then Javonte Williams, I mean, let's be honest with you. He has scored 10.1 or fewer points in 4 of his last 5 games. He's not been great. He's had 1 good game in the last month. And he's got the Patriots. I mentioned I don't love the matchup for Russell. I don't love the matchup for Javonte either. They're giving up 2.5 yards per rush to running backs over the last 4 weeks. Javonte is a risk-reward number 2 or flex at best.
Now at wide receiver, we're going with the youth, rookie Rashee Rice and 2nd-year playmaker Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, man, it's the youth gone wild. Great Skid Row song, by the way, for those of you who grew up in the 80s. Rashee Rice has been awesome, too. I mean, look at the numbers. 14-plus points in 4 straight games, including 2 games with over 20 points. Things aren't going right in Kansas City, but Rice is. He's definitely cooking, and I love the matchup against the Raiders. The last time he faced Las Vegas, he had a big stat line. So start Rashee Rice. And Garrett Wilson, he had a stinker last week. The whole Jets team stunk. Stink, stank, stunk. Grinch reference. Yes, it's Christmas. But I love the matchup against the Commanders. They've allowed 22 touchdowns and the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers out on the perimeter. Start Garrett Wilson.
2 wide receivers on the naughty list. You got Terry McLaurin and Drake London.
Yeah, we told you to play McLaurin last week. Squeaky wheel, right? And he went off. He had a huge game. But this is the Jets. They've allowed 2 touchdowns and the 2nd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers at MetLife Stadium. They are really, really tough at home, not on the road so much as we saw last week with Jalen Waddle. But I would beware McLaurin and Drake London. We didn't like them last week. The matchup wasn't good. It's not a great matchup this week, Eagle, against the Colts, at least lately. They've given up the 7th fewest fantasy points to receivers over the last 4 weeks. So London is a risk-reward flex.
Let's close it out with some tight ends. David Njoku and Pat Freiermuth, they make your start list.
Njoku's been great. Outside of one game, in the last 2 months, he's been phenomenal. Had a huge game last week, and now you got a matchup against the Texans, who've given up the 6th most points to tight ends and the 73.7% catch rate. That's really good. Njoku, well, Joe Flacco has really resurrected him to becoming a really top-end tight end. And Pat Freiermuth, I mean, let's be honest with you. This guy's been Scrooge for the past few weeks. But the last time he played this week's opponent, the Bengals, he had over 20 fantasy points. The Bengals have given up the 2nd most points to tight ends. If you're desperate at the position, Pat Freiermuth is worth a look with Mason Rudolph under center. And I think that Mike Tomlin went to Rudolph this week because it's Christmas.
Just for the Christmas theme, yeah. I'm sure Mike is Coach Tomlin's banking on that for sure. All right, moving over to the tight ends that you don't want to see in any lineups for the fantasy semifinals. That's Dalton Schultz and Kyle Pitts.
And we'll start off with Kyle Pitts. We will not invite him to our reindeer games. I mean, listen, the guy has had 1 or 2 good games all season long. The numbers have not been great. I don't know why Arthur Smith hates him and Bijan Robinson, but he also hates our fantasy football teams. And the Colts have not allowed a tight end to score more than 11.4 points against them this year. So the ceiling is, as those of us from the Northeast say, wicked low. And then Dalton Schultz. I get it. You may have to start him as a back-end tight end 1. The position's very thin. And the Browns have gotten smoked by tight ends lately, but overall, they've still given up the 2nd fewest points to the position. So it's not a great matchup. If C.J. Stroud is able to go, I feel better about Dalton Schultz. But if it's not Stroud and it's potentially Case Keenum, you may want to keep Schultz on the bench.
All right, so that is your start and sit list for Week 16. You win this week and you're in the Fantasy Football Championship. So you need more strategy, you need more advice. Head over and check out Michael Fabiano's rankings on SI.com.